Okay, I think we are set to begin. Again, greetings and welcome to everyone. Um, Let me introduce myself for starters. I'm Meyer Semiatiki. I head up the Ryerson Faculty of Arts Young Workers' Rights Hub. The Hub's goal is to advance young workers' understanding of their rights on the job and how to exercise them. We begin with an acknowledgement. Typically, this would be an acknowledgement of the indigenous lands we live on. Recent days, however, have brought us horrific reminder of the devastating impact colonialism has had on indigenous children, indigenous families, and indigenous communities in this country. I'm referring, of course, to the discovery at the Kamloops, BC residential school recently of the unmarked remains of 215 children who attended that school. We know also that Kamloops was not an isolated case. We need to acknowledge the damage and wrongs that settler society has inflicted on Indigenous peoples. We need concrete action that matches our responsibility for evils that have been done in Canada's name. I urge myself and all of us to play a part in advancing justice for Indigenous nations and peoples. So it's appropriate and important that our topic today is about ending discrimination and harassment and racism. And I'll mention more in a moment that our guest presenters are experts and advocates in the field. They are from the Ontario Federation of Labor. And I'd like to give the director of the Ontario Federation of Labor's Human Rights Department, Ogho Ikhalo, an opportunity. Ogho, I don't know whether the OFL has a standard statement on Indigenous acknowledgement and Indigenous rights that you would like to share with us, or if you have just some thoughts as we transition from um, thinking about that terrible legacy of this country. If there are any thoughts or comments you want to share.
Absolutely, Maya. Thank you so much for having my colleague and I here today. We're so excited to be here. We do have lots of information on OFL.ca pertaining to Indigenous land acknowledgements, why we do it. I will also do a plug that on National Indigenous Peoples Day, we are actually having a very insightful conversation on land acknowledgement and what they really mean and how much value they carry. That will be on June 21st, and that information we can share with you later on. But at this time, I would want to acknowledge that I am joining you from the traditional ancestral territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississauga of the Credit, and the Anishinaabe, the Pardo Ojibwe region as well, which is covered by the Upper Canada Treaty in Turtle Island. Personally, my African ancestors share a parallel history of colonialism with First Nations peoples. And I hope that the events, the tragic events that we've witnessed in what has been an unprecedented year throughout Turtle Island, both north and south. Certainly, what we witnessed just a day and a half ago in London, London, Ontario, the tragic loss of a family who simply went out for a walk. Um, I hope that brings into light the level of racism, Islamophobia, discrimination that is ongoing. It is not just to our neighbors down south, it's right here in our home. And I encourage each and every one of you to take some time to speak to your neighbors, to educate yourself through the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations, certainly through the OFL information portal on just racism in general, um, and learn more, educate yourself, and find out actions that you can take to be part of the solution to what is a systemic an ongoing issue that we all have to combat collaboratively. It's not an individual effort. It's definitely a united effort. So I implore you to take that information, or take that time to learn that information. You can certainly visit the OFL.ca website, and there's a wealth of knowledge and resources that you can attain from there.
Ogho, thank you so much for those really moving and powerful sentiments. This has been, as you say, a terrible stretch of time that we have endured, with so many manifestations of hate and bigotry and racism. And I thank you for naming them. I thank you for calling our attention to the need to act, to push back. Thank you very much for those words, Ogho. And so now on to our related topic for today, and the discussion to unfold. These are tough times for young workers in Canada. They have the highest unemployment rate of any segment of our demographic. And on the job, when they find work, they can encounter a range of problems, including discrimination and harassment. Why those persist and what to do about it are the focus of our conversation today. Our focus is informal and conversational. We're fortunate, as you already can tell, to have three expert labor officials with us to offer their insights and their advice. Ogho Ikhalo, who you've already seen and heard from, is the Director of Human Rights at the Ontario Federation of Labour, or OFL for short. And Zhyn leads workplace rights training at the OFL, and Melissa Palermo is the OFL's Director of Communications. The Ontario Federation of Labour, by the way, represents over 1 million workers who belong to dozens of different union organizations in the province. It's the voice of workers in Ontario. They will be in conversation with two Ryerson students from the politics program, Giselle Girardo, who just weeks ago graduated from her program, and Taylor Deasley in her final year of studies. So I now turn things over to Giselle and Taylor to begin the conversation, and I'm planning to sit back and take it all in myself too. Over to you, Giselle and Taylor.
Thank you, Meyer, for that introduction and for your remarks, welcoming remarks. Thank you. I think we definitely need to start with asking the question, why is this an important conversation?
That's such a great question, Giselle. I guess I will steer the ship and start off. Confronting discrimination, racism, any sort of isms that you can imagine right now that the world is dealing with, and is the world stage is front and center to, essentially, is incredibly difficult. These are difficult conversations, difficult dialogues that are ripe with opportunities to disagree and to quarrel or to argue or whatnot, but they're important and critical conversations to have. I certainly have mentioned some of the instances, both recently and in the last year, but even far before that, that have been that have contributed or have showcased racism and discrimination in all forms. And especially as our youth are growing up and you're graduating and you're about to enter the workforce, and unfortunately you're really part of that gig economy that faces a lot of discrimination already in the workplace, not being governed by or not being part of rules, labor rules that include you. You need to talk about it. You need to have hubs like this and platforms like this to be able to ask critical questions and information share, so you know what to do if you're a victim or victimized in the workplace by an employer. Maya mentioned that, workers face violence and harassment in workplaces across Ontario, often in various sources and in the workplace. And it's through verbal, through words, it's physical. There's a continuum of unwanted behaviors that occur in the workplace. And this ranges again from offensive remarks to violence. In fact, there's a stat that I can share with you that according to a 2018 Stats Canada report, over 19% of women and 13% of men reported that they had experienced harassment in the workplace over the past year. And workplace harassment includes verbal abuse, humiliating behavior. Bullying is a big one. We have all sorts of bullying awareness campaigns now, threats of persons, and so on and so forth. I'll be glad to share that report with you. What we really want you to leave with and know in knowing your rights is that there are three key legislative pieces that sanction the workplace in Ontario. You have the Human Rights Code, you have the Workplace Safety Insurance Act, and you also have the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Fortunately, we've done a lot of work at the OFL through our Prevention Link program to build a Know Your Rights campaign around that. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Anna Zhyn to tell you more about that campaign. Anna?
Thank you, and I'm going to share my screen for a second. Can you hear me well? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I am a communication specialist and Prevention Link, which is a disability prevention program that focuses on occupational injury, illness, and disease on workplace in Ontario. So I'm not going to talk at length about the program because the focus is a little bit different, but I just want to mention that it is supported by the government of Ontario, by WSIB, and it's governed by the Ontario Federation of Labour. And we have 3 decades already when we prove that just working together, employers and unions and workers, that we can actually improve outcomes for both workers and workplaces and employers. And we operate in 3 streams, and you can see this on the screen: occupational disability response training, which is a program. It's several level program that anyone can start attending, be a union representative or a young worker entering the workforce, or an employer representative who wants to improve the outcomes for the workplace. Then we have a return to work, which is our consultant branch. And that's where we use most current research in return to work, and we change management best practices for building consensus-based culture of sustainable return to work outcomes. And what's most pertaining to our conversation today, we have Lighthouse Initiative, which focuses on delivering accessible, reliable information for everyone who's new to Ontario workforce, be it a young worker, be it a student, be it a newcomer, anyone. And we provide concise information about occupational health and safety, employment standards, human rights, and workers' compensation. And I'm just gonna give you a very short tour on our website, which is preventionlink.ca. I'll put it in the chat later. And before I go to Lighthouse Initiative, I just want to draw your attention. You can download the app, you can play with quizzes, there's interactive information about all the legislation that Ogho mentioned just a couple of minutes ago. And I apologize in advance, our Android link doesn't work right now. We're working on resolving this. So only Apple is working. Sorry about that. And you also can go to video library where you can learn about your rights at the workplace. So Lighthouse Initiatives focuses on each of the legislation that Ogho just mentioned separately. And you can just click on one of those buttons and it will bring you to a specific topic. I will just focus on human rights, obviously. And when you click on it, you have access. It's absolutely free. You can download it, print and share it with anybody. Our fact sheets in 12 languages. So you can share it with anybody who is fluent in English or not, if this language is present there. So human rights fact sheet focuses on who regulates human rights in Ontario, who's covered, what employers' obligations are, what your rights are, what your steps are if you're experiencing harassment at work, and most importantly, where to find help. And always remember that you're not alone. Ontario has many organizations, both government and non-government, who provides help for you. Some of them are free. You can always reach out to OFL Prevention Link. You can always reach out to legal clinics, and many organizations will help you and guide you in your journey to defend your rights and to to make your life better and to be able to work and have a decent work life. And I'm gonna go back. At the end of every page, we have a little quiz, so we can always check your knowledge. So that's I guess it for me. And yeah, feel free to explore our website and reach out to us if you have any questions, any help. And I started not too far long ago at Prevention Link, and I took the very basic course, which is just level 1. And I can say that I learned so much about workers' rights, even though I've been in labor movement for like 10 years. But I think just some basic knowledge would be beneficial to all the workers, especially young workers, because we all begin somewhere when we don't know. We just start working, we assume that everything is in our best interest, and everyone wants, like, we're naive and we start our work life, but sometimes things happen. So yeah, just educate yourself and you can always find help.
So the next question is, if we could hear more from you guys about who is especially vulnerable to harassment and discrimination in the workplace, and kind of embellish on why that is and how they can be kind of protected and raise awareness about who's especially vulnerable in this situation.
Well, I can jump into that a little bit and start off by saying that we are all vulnerable to workplace discrimination. I have been a victim of workplace discrimination, and certainly my colleagues here today can speak to their personal experiences with discrimination in the workplace and beyond. Unfortunately, no one is immune to it. But as Anna said, we do have the Ontario Human Rights Code, which is for everyone. And it's a provincial law that gives everyone equal rights and opportunities without discrimination in areas including jobs and other social services. And the code really is to prevent discrimination and harassment stemming from race, sex, disability, age, and a number. And that's just to name a few of the 17 protected grounds within the code. And all Ontario laws must agree with that code. From a youth perspective, I'm going to pass it and introduce my colleague, Melissa Palermo, who's, yes, the Director of Communications, but she's also our lead on our youth, our Young Workers Committee, and she can probably speak more to what she's hearing from our youth. Melissa.
Awesome. Thank you, Ogho. Yeah, I was going to say I am the communications director, but I'm probably most relevant to today's discussion because I resource our Young Workers Committee. Like Ogho said, of course, everyone is vulnerable to discrimination and harassment at work, but we know that particularly marginalized workers, including young workers, and precarious and low wage workers without income security are especially vulnerable to discrimination and harassment at work. Of course, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you don't know what your next paycheck is going to be, you're going to be more likely, or your employer might feel more empowered to be able to take advantage of that. So that's why it's really important for us to be having this discussion today to say, that's not okay in any situation. You have rights at work. Discrimination, harassment is never okay. And so those workers should always feel empowered to speak up and use the resources that we're going to be talking about today to be able to push back against that. And I will say also from a student perspective, I come to the OFL from the student movement, and I know graduate students who are both workers and students also often face or can be more vulnerable to discrimination and harassment. So knowing that not only do you have the laws that folks have talked about today, a little bit later, we're going to talk about the different union procedures, but we know that in a campus setting, there is that intersection of being sometimes both a student and a worker. So you also have campus resources, you have your union, you also have your students union to be able to go to find resources and speak out. So definitely, I think when we're talking about who is especially vulnerable, we know that young workers are in a particularly vulnerable spot. Like Ogho said before, also often working gig jobs. So yeah, I think also that's why it's really important for us to be having this conversation today.
Thank you for that. When you mentioned that we're all vulnerable, I think that was a really great starting point. We don't really realize who is vulnerable until you get into that situation. Many times, young workers are afraid to come out and talk about their experiences. When young workers are in a vulnerable position at their job and are being harassed or discriminated against, what can they do? What steps can they take to start that process?
I guess, Mel, are you going to take this, or should I jump in and then you chime in?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So first of all, educate yourself so you don't become a victim. There's power in education. Like Anna has mentioned, and Mel and myself, we've all been in the labor movement collectively for many years, but we're still learning and we're still educating ourselves so we don't fall victim to various prejudices you find in the workplace and beyond. If you are a victim, first of all, I encourage you to have conversations with your colleagues at work, fellow young workers, because oftentimes if you're a victim of workplace harassment and you have a fellow young worker, they're also experiencing it too. And there's power in community and there's power in collective, and that's why we have a Power of Many campaign at the OFL. You need to talk to your other coworkers, because if you don't know what to do, they may know. They may have that resource. They may have that shared knowledge that you don't have. Certainly, there's several steps you can take. I'm going to let Melissa chime in, and then we'll come back to more tangible steps. But education, being a collective in the workplace, talking to your other young workers, and then stepping up to the plate and speaking out about it. Yes, you can be a victim, but you can also be someone who creates the change you want to see. Mel.
Yeah, so I think on this point of education, I'm going to reiterate what I said before, which is that this is never okay in the workplace. So knowing that first, knowing that if you are experiencing harassment or discrimination, that isn't something that should be happening, and you have recourse. So like Ogho said, speaking to your coworkers, sharing that experience. And this idea of collective is also what a union is based on. So if you're in a unionized environment, there are procedures in place. You should familiarize yourself. First of all, you should, if you are in a unionized environment, you should make sure you have your collective agreement. You should familiarize yourself with your collective agreement. And you should have a steward that you should be able to speak to let them know what's happening, and they can help you through that process. So in a non-unionized environment, talking to your colleagues and going through the processes that I think Ogho is going to speak about after, and then in a unionized environment, familiarizing yourself with your collective agreement, connecting with your steward, and knowing that you have recourse that way as well.
So Mel is absolutely right. This is our collective agreement. You probably can't see it because it's merging, but I know in previous employment and when I was just joining the labor body after graduating, I didn't even know what a collective agreement was. I just knew that they sent me a link to it and I looked at it and it looked like the Apple terms of reference, you know, the like tiny 3,000 words. So I just like nicely put it aside and threw away the link and knew nothing about it. It was actually when I encountered a problem in the workplace that a fellow young worker, coworker was like, have you not read your collective agreement and know that you have rights around that? So yes, I can't stress that enough. If you're fortunate to be in a unionized work environment. Let's speak a little bit about if you're not. For instance, many gig workers are not. They actually considered self-employed, and there's a whole other thing we'll talk about from that angle and what steps you can maybe tap into in your tool belt. First of all, it's to confront, like not confront in like a, hey, no, politely, you know, reach out to who is afflicting the discrimination, who you feel is violating your human rights, and point it out to them in a firm manner. We are, I don't want to say cancel culture, and that's not the intent, but we very much live in a culture now, and especially in the last couple of years, where people are stepping up. People are not afraid to use their voice. They're learning their rights in the workplace and they're speaking out. But there's a way to do that. You don't want to be, again, like you don't want to become the one inflicting human rights as well, right? So in a professional manner, you say, I feel like my human rights are being violated here. I just want to, you know, speak to you about that. Keep records, written records. I learned this really the hard way, and I can't lie and say I didn't take my own advice, but now I've learned how to do that. I had a friend who did it for me when I was being victimized in the workplace. This colleague who was brilliant kept detailed records when she was there and was privy to the discrimination being inflicted on me, or when she heard about it, or when I told her about it. So keep written notes. So when you attempt to bring it to that person, you have like tangible, you know, like this is the date, on this date, this happened. Talk to your employer, because every Ontario employer is required by law to protect their employees from workplace harassment. It's the law. So if they don't do anything about it, then you start talking about and thinking about what your next steps are, which includes everything from going to the Human Rights Tribunal, and you can get in a lawyer if you see fit. There are other options that we can dive into a little bit later on this front. I don't know if Anna, the brilliant Anna, had anything to add. I know she's had some encounters, I'm sure, in the workplace. So feel free to jump in, Anna. Otherwise, we can take it back to our MCs.
Oh, you covered all the fronts, like non-unionized, unionized environment, both. I have only add to like some anecdotal stories. When I was a chief steward in my previous workplace, we had a case like that where my member documented extensively harassment, abuse that she endured, and that helped a lot, and that only could rectify the problem, and it's a much more happy environment right now. I have to say it's changed a lot, the workplace, but it was like very heartbreaking for me going to work, and because I really liked the job, and I was going to work with like a light heart, and knowing that there are people in the same workplace who experiencing really like awful things, humiliation and harassment. And if you will happen to be a steward, always support your members. And if you're not a steward, if it's non-unionized environment, and you educate yourself, you can always help others, help your coworkers to get better and to help them. Yeah.
Those are all great points. I actually hadn't thought of a lot of those, especially with finding allies in the workplace and getting legal assistance. Those are all really great, like tangible tips on what to do. And
can I add? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, can I just add one more thing? I'm really sorry to have cut you off.
No
I was
worries.
trying to figure out a good way to jump in. I just want to say also, as we're having this conversation, I also want to note that and I think both Ogho and Anna alluded to this, but also don't think of this just from an individual perspective. As a colleague, also think about your other coworkers and keep an eye on the culture and what's happening, because I think that's also really important to this discussion. It's not just on one person to be documenting what's happening to them. You can be really helpful if you can also identify and be an ally to that person and find out a way to support them.
That's a really great point, especially because I think, at least in my experience and my friends' experience who have experienced harassment and discrimination in the workplace, it's a very isolating experience sometimes. So I think that's a really good point to bring up about like watching out for your coworkers, because that doesn't happen all the time. So that's a really good point as well. To take it even further, I'd love to hear your thoughts on if you are being discriminated against or harassed by a superior, because a lot of times they say, oh, report to the manager or report to human resources. But what if there is no human resources, and what if the manager or the person in power there is the person who is either harassing you or discriminating against you?
Yeah, I'll jump in again on that one. And that's a great question. Thanks for posing it. So if you find yourself in a situation like that where, yeah, your employer or your supervisor is the antagonist, for lack of a better terminology, we have the Human Rights Tribunal in Ontario. And this is whether or not if you're unionized or not. If you unionize, and I'm sure Melissa or Anna can jump in from that end, so I don't hug the entire speaking period. If you unionize, I don't want to say it's easier, but your union can steer you through internal mechanisms through the union, and also lead you into the Human Rights Tribunal if you opt to go that route. If you're not unionized, let's talk about that. The Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario is precisely, it was created for that. So it's a complaint mechanism. So if you have dealt with any like discrimination, or you feel that your human rights have been violated in the workplace, you can go to this independent body, which was established under the Human Rights Code, to file a complaint and file an application. And the body is really there to help you determine if your rights have been violated. I will say that, yes, there is systematic racism and systemic problems. So it could come out that tribunal says, no, you have not been violated, and you still feel violated. So it's not by any means a perfect system, but it is a tool that is available to you to utilize. I will stress that there is a time period. So you have a year within, like a year from the last incident that you can speak to of discrimination that you've experienced, to file an application or a complaint with the Human Rights Tribunal. A few other tidbits on that. It needs to be what the tribunal deems a constructive dismissal. So they want to see that every effort has been made to address whatever violations you feel have occurred. Now, what is a constructive dismissal? I think we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about, is the system working or not, or are there loopholes in the system? Because I'm sure any one of us here today will have different takeaways or different definitions of a constructive dismissal, or different perspective on violation of human rights. So, but at least there are rules and governances like the tribunal in place. There's also the human rights, like it's like a legal aid. Essentially, this is separate from the legal aid system, but this is a OHRC legal system that helps you or helps claimants who are filing an application to provide more of a legal guidance, and at times some financial assistance, I think, or direct you to financial assistance. I'll hand it over to Anna or Melissa to jump in if they feel free.
I can start really briefly, and then Anna, you can add if you have anything additional. But like Ogho said, not that it's necessarily easier in a unionized setting, but there is a process, and that's really the power of the collective of a union, in that it can be really difficult if it is happening from a superior, for you to then go to that person. But like Ogho said, there are processes in place. If you are in a unionized setting, you like I said, you'll have a steward who you can go to, and there will be often a process for how you can then engage in likely a grievance against the employer for what is happening. So what's nice about that is that there's a process already laid out, and you have someone that you know that you can go to, outside of just having to go to management.
I just want to edit, just highlight even more what Ogho said, that there is a legal assistant that is free, because for young workers especially, just thinking, oh my God, I have to hire a lawyer now, so I will never be able to afford it, which is true. So there's some free legal assistant available for you. And also always know that it's completely illegal for you to be fired after you complain on human rights grounds. So yeah, keep this in mind.
Thank you for that. Now to even take it further, what if young workers are afraid to complain because of the fear that they will lose their job? Is it possible for young workers who filed a complaint in any way to still keep their job? As we all know, there is a high unemployment rate, and I think the worst thing that can happen to them is losing their job and facing all of these processes.
Mel, do you want to jump in, or do you want me to lead this again, and then we can go from there?
You got this to start.
I think it's hard. It's scary facing discrimination in the workplace as a young worker, and it's like your first or second job, and you're like, I can't lose the job because I have, I have responsibilities. But you have to speak up. And we've certainly alluded to some of the tools that you have in your tool belt, including the tribunal. If it is an ESA issue, yes, we're speaking very much to human rights today. There's also an ESA, so Employment Standard Act component. There is a different mechanism for complaining to that. I will mention that, and I will post that link because I feel it's important for you to know that as well. Like if you're like getting deducted your pay or whatnot, like you should know that rights as well. And if you download any of our fact sheets, you'll find the information there as well. But you need to speak up. Again, if you have a union, utilize your union. You pay dues. So if you don't know that when you're part of a union, you pay dues. So this is what the union's there for. And of course, we're going to promote union because we're from the union. So utilize your stewards. Go to them. There is mechanisms in place. You can file a grievance against your employer if it comes to that. If they feel that you are in fact victimized, and you have immediate support, because most of the time the union is for the workers. We believe you because there have been lots of proof to showcase that. Again, reach out to the tribunal. You can get that. You can always call the ORFL. Yes, we are representing 1 million unionized workers, but we also represent non-unionized workers. We are the workers' body. You can always call us for direction. We'll be glad to help or to direct you in the right place. Reach out to your academic advisors, or even, like, I'm sure Meyer, he looks like he's full of wisdom. He can also be a first point of call, and he may not know, but he can direct you accordingly. And again, utilize that allyship, utilize your fellow coworkers who, like I mentioned at the top, if you feel that you're being discriminated against, most likely another worker who's there, another young worker, is probably feeling victimized too, and is equally afraid to speak up. But there's power in the collective. So utilize that. I don't know if Anna and Mel have anything to add.
Yeah, I can follow up. I mean, as has been said, if you're fired because you've made a complaint, this is called reprisal. It's illegal. And if this happens, you can either sue your employer for wrongful dismissal or file a complaint under the occupational health and safety laws. So that's an important thing to know. In terms of other resources, in addition to contacting the OFL, there's also the Workers Action Center. So I'm just going to put their link in the chat, which is also a really great resource. They're located in Toronto, but they serve the province. And I also we're going to, I think, talk a little bit more about gig work later, but I also just want to kind of acknowledge, we're talking a lot about like if you're in a unionized workplace or if you're not, there's also the option to unionize workplaces. And so it can often be really overwhelming to, if we think about the gig economy, if we think about taking on Uber Eats or Foodora, no, not Foodora, they left, Skip or DoorDash or whatever, that is really, those are big companies that it can be really overwhelming. But there are a lot of efforts underway to organize workers. So there's Gig Workers United, which came after Foodsters United, which was a successful campaign to unionize Foodora workers. But that's an example of workers who, you know, they're up against some really big employers, but they're organizing themselves to advocate for better conditions, because we know there are, of course, these we're kind of speaking in a one-off discrimination and harassment kind of way if this happens to you, but we also know that oftentimes these problems are systemic. And we know, especially when we're talking about big companies, those things can be really pervasive. So like I said, I think we'll talk a little bit more about gig work a little bit later, but I also want to acknowledge that, you know, there's also the option to unionize your workplace if this is something that is that you see happening, because like we've outlined, the process is just a little bit, there is more of a process to be able to protect yourselves and protect your fellow workers.
Thank you for that. And those are really great points, Melissa, about filing human rights complaints and kind of getting involved in the legal side of the process. So I'm wondering if the three of you could kind of embellish on that a little bit further in terms of how that process kind of works in terms of reporting it to the Human Rights Tribunal and reporting a human rights complaint. And for example, if you get denied, can you file an appeal, and how does that kind of work?
For sure. So as I mentioned, the tribunal is that independent body legislated or established under the Human Rights Code, and it deals with claims of discrimination that are filed underneath or under the code. So again, essentially it decides if they feel, they decide they're supposed to be an objective party, and you can learn more at that the website link that we've provided on how the entity is formed. The nonpartisan. So they decide if your claim or if your application is in fact a violation of your human rights. Again, be aware of the time limits. It is a year, but I always encourage you to check before you apply, because at any point legislations change, time limits change. So be apprised of that. And I will let you know that they are open, they are functioning right now. Everything's virtual, but the office is dealing with cases as we speak. So if you can appeal, I use that term loosely. It's under the code. Essentially, it says that the tribunal's decision is final, and it is binding to all parties. However, the tribunal may agree to reconsider a final decision. For instance, if they feel that a party has new facts that were not available at the time of the original hearing, which could change the results, and it can result in a different decision by the tribunal. Or if the party did not receive notice of the hearing, for instance, like it could have gone to the wrong address or any of those nuanced reasons, they can take into consideration those under an appeal. Or if there's a decision that conflicts with the tribunal procedure or case laws or involves a matter of general public importance, you can file an appeal under those cases, under those kind of 3 provisions, but otherwise it is binding. Any decision coming out of the tribunal is binding according to the code.
And I think moving on, in terms of the laws and policies that are kind of protecting us and that we can file complaints with, what are your thoughts on, like, are the existing laws and policies to protect from discrimination and harassment, are they sufficient? And what are your thoughts on kind of those laws and how they protect young workers? Can they be better, and kind of suggestions moving forward?
And I see your wheels turning. Did you want to jump in on this one first, or or even Mel?
Sure, yeah, I can start on that one. We have some great laws in Ontario and Canada, but everything can be improved. But what most importantly, I think you should be vigilant and watch so that nothing is rolled back. So be involved and make sure your rights are not taken away. They're never given to you. You always fight, and unions fought a lot for that. And we all collectively, all workers, unionized, non-unionized, we still fighting for rights and protections. So be involved, and if you see there's a hearing, a discussion is happening in the parliament, make sure your MPP knows your opinion on that, and they can then advocate for you and do something and maybe stop something from happening or make something happen that will improve your work life. And there's a perfect example in the United States recently when I think it was California, when they passed a law where in California, those gig workers are considered contractors now. So there's no way from now until probably the next election to actually change that. And that's horrible. So we should be very vigilant so that that doesn't happen here, because companies like that, like Uber, like Amazon, they have tremendous lobbies and it's hard to compete with them. But if we all join together, we can do it. So there's always room for improvement, but also let's make sure that we don't lose any rights.
Absolutely. And just to jump on that, it's definitely educating yourselves about the laws and the legislations and the policies that govern Ontario workplaces. They're out there for you to read. Read them, and they're your rights to know. If you have a collective agreement, it's kind of like your work. I'm religious, so this sounds sacrilegious, but God will forgive me. It's your work Bible. Like, read it, know your rights, because employers like to push the boundaries or take advantage of the fact that a lot of people treat the CBA like the Apple terms of reference. Like, you just, oh, thanks for that, put it aside. But when you're familiar with it, you can call them out, and they hate that, but they signed on to it just like you did. So familiarize yourself with that. Scrutinize any, like when you get your first job and it's like 3 pages of contract, scrutinize it, review it. It's your first chance to actually get your say. Like if they're only giving you 2 weeks, or if they're saying you have to dress a certain way or look a certain way, like in America, who comes up with laws all the time where, like, me as an African, I can't wear my natural African hair to work because I don't look a certain way. I'm sure you guys have heard of those stories that come out. That's illegal. At least in Canada, it's illegal. In certain parts of America where they sanction these laws, I don't know what's going on there. It's a different Kool-Aid, but question policy, challenge it, ask questions, scrutinize that contract, and make sure you know everything that you're walking into before you walk into it. And again, if you're part of a union, know your stewards, learn their names, know them by names. Like I said, you are paying for that union, you are paying your union dues, and consider getting involved in your union, be part of it. We've all, Mel and Anna and I have been part of our union, and it's been beneficial to us. We've learned a lot. We're by no means saying that the union is perfect. We're not gonna lie to you and say it is, but it's beneficial. It's been quite helpful. For me, and certainly I see my colleagues nodding. So yes, those are some of the tips that we can leave with you right now.
And I also just want to suggest, I'll put my comms hat on and suggest following organizations like the OFL, like Prevention Link on social media, like the Workers Action Center and the Justice for Workers campaign, because I know we're talking a lot about, stay educated on the laws and the legislation and all of those. And I know we're all very busy people and we have lots of reading to do, but organizations like us exist to have our finger on the pulse of what new laws are up, our workers' rights being attacked, and often we will be taking action and be trying to mobilize people if there are workers' rights under attack. So I'll throw all the links to the OFL and Prevention Link social media in the chat, and I really encourage you to follow us, just because then you don't have to go through all the laws yourself and educate yourself. Although if that's a project you want to take on, I encourage you to.
And come volunteer at the OFL, would love to help.
But that will definitely help keep you up to date on kind of what's going on and how you can take action.
Thank you for that. Just a reminder to everyone that provincial and federal elections will be coming up soon. So the provincial election will be coming up next year, 2022. So I'm pretty sure that they're looking for more support in the community, and this is one way to interact with your MPP. We have a few more questions left, and then we'll have to end it off. So what type of workers are not covered by the current laws and policies? Are gig workers such as Uber Eats, Uber, DoorDash, are they covered by the laws and policies? And how can they protect themselves from discrimination and harassment?
So that's such a timely question, Giselle, and thanks for asking it. I actually just posted some links in the chat to gig workers challenging current legislation because unfortunately gig workers such as Uber Eats, Skip the Dishes and whatnot, they are not covered. They're considered independent contractors, which means that they work for themselves. So yes, they have the flexibility to set their own schedule according to the legislation. That's how they've termed it. So it says they have the flexibility to set their own schedules and work as much or as little as they choose, but they're ineligible for standard employment protection such as the ESA. That's very questionable. Like you're a worker, you should be covered by the ESA at the very basic level, basic and fundamental level. So unfortunately, it's not. But gig workers in Ontario are challenging the classification. They are pushing back. They are fighting back. I know this was very much a topic of conversation a couple of years back when we went to the Rise Up conference, which was held by our Canadian National Chapter, the Canadian Labour Congress, the Youth Summit. It got to a point, actually, it was quite heated because the Prime Minister was there and a lot of the youth stood up and turned their backs on him in protest of how, on many things, but definitely the gig workers and how young workers are being treated. So it is being challenged. It's an ongoing conversation. I know that Melissa, through our Young Workers Committee, this conversation comes up every once in a while. And I know it's part of our convention policy and resolutions that we deal with as part of the OFL labor body to continue to challenge every year. So we're fighting. And as you can see with the Ford government, it takes time, but we're pushing for it. Mel?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add other than we really know that this is an issue that's very much facing young workers, and it can feel like a big task, but that's why organizing like what's happening with Gig Workers United is really important. And there's not only conversations about well, we fight against the classification of gig workers as independent contractors, but also are trying to organize or support the organizing of these workers because we know that they're in a really precarious situation. So it's definitely something that we talk about a lot and talk about the different ways that we can support gig workers and the fight to not have them listed as independent contractors.
I just want to add a little bit more. Then you'll be surprised that some other sectors also not covered by legislation, like especially if it's under federal jurisdiction, like banks, for example, airlines. Literally, when I heard about it like a couple of years ago, I was like, what? So if someone harasses me and I'm work for the bank, it's something different that if I work in school. No, it's the same experience, but like very different experience. Also migrant workers, also if you're doing job for like a private job for someone, you're also not protected. So like really try to have an official employment, probably not just federal, I'm just joking. But there's just different ways to deal with it. Yeah, you should really look up at the government website the long list of sectors that are actually not covered by certain laws in Ontario.
Thank you for that. That was very enlightening. And thank you for forwarding that article. I think that's definitely something to read after this workshop. And as we end off today's event, I have one last question. What is one thought you would like to leave young workers or our attendees with?
I think one thought that I would like to leave young workers with are that like young workers are the future of the workforce, and young workers really have the power to not only advocate for themselves, but for better workplaces and safer workplaces. And so this isn't only about protecting yourself from discrimination and harassment, like I said before, but also creating healthier and safer workplaces for everybody. So I think that's the one thing to leave you all with, kind of moving forward, and that's also the power of working collectively within a union, is that you are able to work together and shape those workplaces.
I just want to echo what Melissa said. Yeah, young workers, you have the right, because you have the right to be heard, and your voices matter. And I think also just to be reminiscent about when I was a young worker, really educating yourself helps a lot in the long run. Just saying.
I echo those sentiments as well. And as one of your colleagues mentioned here, we are heading into a pivotal election. Definitely federally, we're waiting for Trudeau to drop that writ, but we know that the the provincial election in Ontario is June of 2022. Rock your vote. It is your voice. That's your time to say, no, I don't agree with this legislative pieces, or yes, I do, whichever one. But I'm kind of the mindset, and this might be a little harsh, if you don't show up, then you can't complain about it, because you have a chance to speak. That is your voice. It is a right. It is your right. So speak up and speak to your MPPs. Call them up. They're there to serve you. They were elected to serve your community. So ask them the difficult questions, and get them to change policies for the better, not just for our generation, but the future generations. And that sounds so cliche. I remember being in workshops like this in school, and they're like, oh, like David Suzuki's going on about climate change, but he's right. Like, we have to, you got to listen, you got to get out there, you got to mobilize, you got to be part of the action and part of the solution, so that when you're complaining, you're like, I have every right to complain because I rocked my vote, I spoke up, I am active, I'm an advocate, I'm pushing for changes as well. So get out there, use your voice, mobilize, educate yourself. Reach out to the OFL if you need anything. We'll be glad to help and educate and share some of our educative resources, and keep going to platforms like this. And don't be afraid to have those difficult and crucial conversations. They are uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about race all the time. And I have lived experience. It's exhausting, but it needs to be had. The crucial conversations need to be had. So don't be afraid to have them. And if you are, come to your colleagues, seek allies to help you have those conversations.
Ogho, that's a really powerful, almost closing argument to be making. I am mindful of the time, we're into overtime now. Have I taken away anyone's opportunity to say one last, to answer Giselle's question about one last, I've almost lost track now. No, I think we've heard from each of the presenters. We also wanted to leave a little bit of time if there's any question from the audience. I'm mindful we had scheduled this for as a 1 hour, and a number of people have had other commitments since 5 o'clock. But if there are any other questions, please do enter them into the chat function, and I'll ask Giselle to keep an eye on those and maybe answer, pose any questions that come up. And I'll take the opportunity to say a few words of closing for this event. Firstly, a series of thank yous. Thank you to participants and the audience who has been with us. And I've noticed that we have a very loyal and returning group of participants, and I appreciate that very much, as well as newcomers who join us for a first time. But I especially want to thank, of course, Ogho and Anna and Mel. You've given us such strong insights and kind of inspiration to speak out and take a stand and voice concerns that we experience at work. And I really want to thank you for that. I, of course, want to thank our hosts for this session, Giselle Girardo and Taylor Deasley, for a terrific set of questions that you have posed. And I then want to reach ahead just to give you a preview of what comes next, because today's session, as you can see, is part of a 5-part series of presentations. And lo and behold, our next session is on a theme that has come up frequently today, the situation facing gig workers. And our topic is fairness for gig workers. And Melissa, our speaker and presenter that day, will be somebody you have mentioned and an organization you've mentioned a few times. Jennifer Scott, who is the president of the organization Gig Workers United, will be talking to us about what's going on in the gig economy and what issues arise within it for gig workers. So I strongly encourage you to register for that next session. And with that, I'm noticing that we have had some questions come up into the chat, I believe. So Giselle, would you raise and pose those as they've come in? And why don't we say we'll take maybe 5 minutes or so of additional overtime, because I can imagine that our presenters especially have other commitments. So why don't we say we'll go no late, it's 5:08 now, we'll go no later than 5:15. I think their collective agreement says they do not do more than 15 minutes of overtime. So I am not going to impose more than that on them, or else I will run into trouble. Giselle, over to you.
Thank you, Meyer. Okay, and the question that came into the chat is, what are the mechanisms in place to protect the complainants and the witnesses during investigation? I think this is a very important question.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the Human Rights Tribunal kind of leads on that front in that they do have mechanisms. So once you do file that complaint, as Melissa first of all mentioned earlier, if you're still at work when you file the complaint, you can't get fired, because then they're in breach and contravention of, I think it is the ESA or the Human Rights Code as well. So the employer can't terminate you based on your complaint. Certainly it doesn't stop them from trying to be manipulative or make your life more difficult, your work life more difficult. And those are just grievances that you can add on to the tribunal and report to the tribunal after you filed your application. So certainly when you've gone to the tribunal with your application, my understanding is that they do keep in communications with you, so you can continue to be protected from that manner, so that it can kind of stop any further violations essentially from happening. I don't know if Mel or Anna want to chime in on this one. I mean, Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, just can add something because every case is different. You can, sorry. Every case is different. So if, for example, you're involved in a case where it's not your supervisor or your management, if it's between colleagues, then employer can hire a third party to conduct an investigation. And I've been involved in something like that in the past. And in this case, all identities and all the information that is shared is protected. So that's the way to protect everyone from like privacy perspective.
And if you are unionized, there's even further protection because, I mean, your stewards and your union is now well aware. Oftentimes, the like steward generally monitors the case moving forward and protects you in a trustful own way, but then they start following and monitoring and reporting anything moving forward, especially even emails and stuff, which can be, you can BCC or CC your union steward after a complaint has been made and during the process of review and whatnot. So I would say it's a little bit easier when you have a union, but certainly there are mechanisms in place, as Anna has alluded to as well, if you're outside of the union, to protect you.
Thank you for that really informative additional information, and I hope that answers the question that's been posed. I'm also reminded that Melissa and Ogho and Anna had suggested if there are any follow-up questions or advice, you can get in touch with them. Melissa also mentioned the Workers' Action Center and gave a contact for it. They are also very helpful in advising on individual situations and circumstances of difficulties in the workplace. Giselle, I'm not sure if we have any more questions. If so, we have 3 minutes for them, or otherwise, are there any more questions? No. Okay. So this was so informative and important, and just really helpful in terms of understanding the landscape and what workers and young workers especially can do if they are experiencing discrimination and harassment. I really, really want to thank Ogho. Thank you. You really made all this happen. I reached out to you, and you in turn reached out to your colleagues, and this has really been a terrific session. And I thank you very much. It's recorded. It will get many, many additional views on our website. Give it a few days and it'll appear on our website. Again, Giselle and Taylor, thank you so much, and look forward to doing this again next week when our focus is on the gig economy and gig workers. Thank you so much to everyone.